Hey, party people, and welcome to this episode of But Are You Weird? A podcast dedicated to spending time talking with some creative, captivating, and downright cool people, diving into their world and ultimately asking, but are you weird? I'm Amanda, your host and resident weirdo, and I am so happy you are here. And our guest on this episode is Kathy Post. Yay, Kathy Post! Kathy's here.
Well, thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you're on the show. And we were just talking before we started recording about how you're Kathy Post. Like you're one of those two name, one named people, I guess you would say. Have you always been Kathy Post?
I have actually always been Kathy Post through different relationships, through different parts of my life. And in fact, when I used to babysit, one of the kids I took care of growing up woke up in the morning, saw me in his room and said, "It's Kashi Post."
Oh, that's cute. Wow. So you really legitimately have always been Kathy Post.
Yeah, I have been.
There's some people where it's just like, if someone were to say, "Hey, did you see Kathy?" I would be like, "I'm not quite sure who you're talking about." But if it was, "Oh, have you seen Kathy Post?" I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, I know that person." So with that, actually, Kathy Post, can you introduce yourself and tell us who you are, what you do, what's meaningful? This is a very broad question, so interpret it however you would like.
Okay. So you already know my name because we've said it about 20 times. And I'm teaching in the physical therapy department at Springfield College right now, even though I taught in the occupational therapy department at Springfield College for over 30 years. So I am an OT, teaching both PT and OT students and loving it. I officially retired in August 2020. But I guess I wasn't really ready to leave because right away I kept involved with other things like adjunct teaching and running an online support group for people with stroke, and then getting involved with our on-campus community mobility clinic. And then last December, I got a phone call from PT saying, "We have an opening. You are qualified for it. Would you please consider applying?" And I did and had a really fun spring. Then I got the summer off and I'm back this fall, and it appears that I will be continuing this spring as well in a full-time position in PT. So that's my work life. Before I was here, I was practicing OT in a variety of settings, but mostly focusing on assistive technology and adaptive equipment.
I didn't realize that your background experience was in that assistive tech.
Oh, you didn't know that? Oh,
no. I made the assumption it was stroke.
Well, that's why I got to teach that class in the spring. Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of, it made sense even without knowing what you practiced. I just thought, well, Kathy knows everything. So of course she would.
I don't.
And she's a tinkerer, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
But I just assumed that and maybe there is overlap, but I assumed that a lot of your practice came from stroke and stroke rehab.
No, actually that came later. And there was let me think. So even in my first job, which was in an early intervention program in Brattleboro, Vermont, this was back in the 70s. Their early intervention programs were really just starting up at that point. But even there, working with young kiddos in my first job as an OT, I was tinkering. I built a bolster chair, and my mother was working at Dartmouth, and she connected me with somebody in the engineering department there, so that our center had a relationship with students and faculty at Dartmouth to explore some engineering solutions for kids with disabilities. And then from there, I went to Crotched Mountain Rehab Center in New Hampshire. And I became the team mechanic for the wheelchair sports teams.
Wow.
Did a lot of work with seating and mobility, working with a couple of engineers and a machinist there who caved into my requests to learn a few things about like welding and using machine shop machines and so forth. And then, and I was there for 4 years. And then I went down to Belchertown State School, which was still open at the time, where they had a special department called Adaptive Design Services that was set up as part of the consent decree when the lawsuits came through the states that mandated better services, more services for people living in these big state institutions for people with intellectual and physical disabilities. And in that department, we had machinists and engineers and designers and, people who welded things and, built mostly wheelchairs, but also other kinds of equipment that enabled people who had never even been out of bed before and who had significant deformities to be able to leave their beds, leave their buildings, and eventually move out into the community.
Wow.
That was an amazing job. From there, I went and worked for a wheelchair vendor for a year and then worked at Newington Children's Hospital where I ran the adaptive equipment clinic. So all of that was work that I really loved, with being able to use equipment to help people sit and eat and function and communicate with people. You could see an immediate difference in people whose underlying physical condition might not change all that much, but their functional abilities just blossomed.
Yeah.
So, we worked with someone who's no longer with us, but who was able to get out and use a communication device and get married and live in a state group home in Northampton, who actually wrote a book. And, it was thanks to the work that this crew were able to do with her that she had that in her life instead of just being stuck in a bed in an institution.
I was thinking as you were saying that you really were pioneering opportunities for people. And I think about the hope side of this of like, certainly, if someone's been in bed for so long and you're giving them the opportunity to interact with their world in a different way because of the equipment you bring to them. Certainly, yes, the physical benefits, but like the emotional and mental benefits of like how incredible. Good that feels.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tremendously satisfying. The system we were working in was not the most functional in the world. And of course, equipment has changed so much over the years. I had the privilege of watching all of that technology develop, and I hope maybe also contributed to the development at some points because of the professional organizations that I was able to be a part of and people I met and, being able to consult with some manufacturers. It was really exciting.
I bet. Yeah. And it's so wild now to think that I didn't know this about you at all. I just thought, oh, Kathy's teaching that course.
This right here is an opportunity for a longer conversation,
Yeah.
Most of our conversations are short because one of us has to go to class or go home or,
Yes. I want to get back to the equipment conversation because I have two, of course, bizarre-ish questions for you. Maybe not that bizarre, actually. My first question is, I know that when I was practicing as an OT, and I still practice on occasion, but I loved making things for my clients. So I know that you, of course, were very involved in the adaptive equipment and assistive tech stuff. But like, did you make anything unique, totally new? You like fabricated something on the spot? Like, Do you have like a favorite thing that you've ever made?
I do, actually. And this was a number of years ago. There was someone who was coming to the college who had had a stroke. And this particular person in one of our support group meetings once said to me that after she had had her stroke and while she was recovering and realized that she wasn't going to have the use of one of her hands, she said, "Oh, now I'll never learn to knit." And I said,
You said, not on my watch.
So we talked about it a little bit. And she had been going to a knitting store where there was just this wonderful person who runs a local knitting store who was giving her lessons. And that person would have to hold the needle that you're knitting from, and then have this our person in question operate the right needle and do all of the knitting with their right hand. And I thought, I bet I can develop something.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing I had to do myself was learn to knit, which I did by YouTube, through YouTube. And then once I figured out, okay, here are the requirements, and I'm not sure I even knew at that point that there's continental knitting and British style knitting and, all these different styles that people use. But I knew, because I used to work on a federally funded database of equipment for people with disabilities, that there was not much on the market. And that what was there was stuff that clamped to a table. And I thought, I've never seen somebody actually knitting sitting at a table. You sit on a couch or in a chair or whatever, and that's how you do it. And you want to be able to be social and do it with other people around you. So I went down in my basement where I have an ungodly amount of saved materials and quite a few tools, and just started tinkering and used some clamps. I thought, I need something to hold the needle, but I also need it to be able to be clamped down and released with one hand. And I remembered from when I worked at Belchertown that we used a certain kind of clamp from a regular hardware store to secure lap trays to wheelchair armrests. And I thought, that kind of clamp would work. You can operate it with one hand. It locks into position. You can unlock it with one hand. So, I fiddled around with that and some various pieces of wood and nuts and bolts and fasteners and that kind of thing. And I came up with a prototype that I tried out. I wasn't crazy about it, so I kept refining it. And then one day I shared it with the person in question, and I had the chance to take it to the knitting store where she had been going for lessons, and it worked. It was like such an exciting thing. And I actually have some video of that session. And, I sent her home with the device, and she used it for a while at home. And so, it helped her achieve her goal. Was it easy? No, it was pretty challenging for a person to do with one hand, but it was physically possible. And she used it for a while, and then I think, moved on to other interests and so forth. But what I was really happy about was that when I built it, I built a second one. So I still have one at home.
Oh, it's like Cinderella with glass slippers.
Well, I can bring it in and show you, and I can also share the video with you. But
that would be
I was
great.
so excited about that. I had such a great time with it. And the best part for me, well, there were two best parts for me. One was that the client was really happy with it. And she was so thrilled that she was able to do that, at least for a while, and that idea of opening up an opportunity for somebody with a piece of equipment was really important to me.
Yeah. I think too, I mean, it's going back to that, what I had said about pioneering opportunities, like you're showing that this is possible. And so I wonder if the client starts to think, wow, what else is possible? So have you always been a tinkerer? You describe your OT life experience as being tinkering, but I want to know, like, teeny tiny itty bitty little Kathy Post. Did you tinker?
Yeah. Yeah, actually.
What were you doing?
Well, I'm trying to think where I got this from. And you always have these apocryphal family stories. My parents, my brothers and my parents, didn't have much money when we were growing up. My dad was a minister, and so they never owned a home. We all lived in the parsonage. And, there's a story before I was born. I think it was before I was born, when my brother was small. My parents didn't have a car. They were living in a rather poor city in New Jersey at the time. And somebody gave them an old car, but it needed a new, I don't know, radiator or something like that, or water pump. Who knows what it was. And my dad went to the library and he took out a book on fixing cars. And he went in the backyard and dug a big hole and then drove the car over the hole so that he could get underneath it and work on it. And, I had heard this story a number of times, but it turns out some family stories aren't very true. But this one actually was. And my brother remembers the big hole in the backyard because later on, he would play in it, as young kids like to do. They like to play in the dirt and play in big holes. So I think that story is true. And I think, my parents, mostly because of economic reasons, tried to make things and fix things themselves a lot, And so one of my favorite places in the house growing up was always the basement, and I'd go down and mess around with stuff in the basement. Since there were only two of us, my brother and me, and the parsonages tend to be 4 or 5 bedroom houses, I always had my own room. So I had room to pile up stuff and do different things. And, I would do the typical little girl things, I think, of playing with dolls and stuffed animals. But I actually remember somebody gave me a chalkboard once, and I lined up my stuffed animals on the floor facing the chalkboard and started teaching them.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that weird?
That's so precious.
and then, I had a Barbie doll, one Barbie doll, when all little girls were going crazy for these. And my mother had stayed up late nights sewing clothes for my Ginny dolls and my Shirley Temple doll, which predated that. So, I made things for my Barbie dolls and Ginny dolls. But the things I made were less about clothing and more about furniture, and so I'd use cardboard. My favorite Christmas stocking gifts were Scotch tape and Elmer's glue and scissors and colored pencils and all that kind of stuff. So, I was always making something.
Wow. I love that. I love imagining little Kathy Post constructing and building. And I think it's so neat that you said, your mother's sewing and yet you were making furniture. I'm trying to think of what does that mean? I don't know. You were building a world in some ways. You were building the context.
Yeah.
So, do you remember anything in particular that you were really proud that you made or something?
Yeah, I do. So I made a little, I don't know if it was a bedside stand or a dresser, and it actually had little drawers that you could pull out.
Wow. Do you remember how old you were when that happened, when you made that?
Maybe 9 or 10, something like that. And then, my dad, if there was wood down in the basement that he didn't care about, he wasn't an incredibly skilled carpenter or anything, But he would do the research and he would figure it out. He built a cabin, a one-room cabin up in Vermont, pretty much well, my mother helped him. My brother became a contractor. And, so he's built houses all his life. And he's also an excellent Finnish carpenter, and he's built furniture and so forth. But we had a family adventure where when I was living in New Hampshire with a boyfriend, which took some convincing of my parents that was okay. But the boyfriend and I bought a piece of land, and my parents were living in Vermont at the time. And there was an old tourist cabin down on a back corner of their lot. And my brother came along with his wife and his truck and said, we could get this out of the woods for you and rebuild it on Kathy and ex-boyfriend's land. And so we did that. So that was a whole family project.
Wow. Tinkering runs in the family.
I think it does. Yeah.
I'm thinking about little girls, other little girls at the same time. Did you share the same interests as your friends?
Well, you have different friends that you do different things with. I would, depending on the grade we were in, I would do some things with my female friends. But there was a gang of boys down the street that I also did stuff with. We did some sports stuff, and we built a shack behind somebody's garage, and hung out there. And
you can't see me because my video is not on, but I've got a really big smile hearing all of this. It's first of all, it's still so great to imagine little Kathy Post. I'm imagining you with like the same haircut that you have now, just tinkering away. And I'm also thinking, there's a handful of parallels between things that you've said so far, especially thinking about tinkering growing up, because my dad is a mechanic. And so he used to work on, I don't think he ever dug a hole though and drove a car over it, but that's very practical. That anytime anything in the house wasn't working, and similar, like growing up with limited resources, like you just can't buy things and replace them. It was, okay, we're going to figure out how to fix it. And so I learned a lot of that from my dad too. And I used to help him go in the garage and work on cars. And I remember him fixing the VCR with a rubber band one time. And
there you go. Yeah, that little belt always breaks, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And watching him do that. And then now that I'm thinking about it, like, well, what got me into crafting? Because I too like to build. I love the puzzle and the brain energy of trying to figure out how to make things work. And it was really like, I think for me, being able to share that time with my dad. Where you don't really have to say much at all, but it's like, the nods of approval that you get of like, wow, I see what you're doing there. That's a good approach. And even now, as an adult, when I build something, I definitely take pictures and send it to my dad. Like, Dad, look at what I made.
Aww.
Jumping back a little bit, too, when I think about why you were invited on this episode. One, you're just a wonderful person. I love seeing you.
Oh, thank you.
I was definitely very nervous the first time I ever met you because I was like, oh my gosh, that's Kathy Post. And I'm also anxious when I meet new people. And then I realized you're like one of the easiest people to talk to, and you're so warm and welcoming. And I really love that. You're also an OT, so I of course know we're going to get along. But the way that you view the world and the way that you build things, the tangible and the intangible. So your construction skills that I've seen on Facebook as you tinker away at different things, but also thinking about how you build your classroom space, how you build the sense of community. Like, you are forever problem solving with beautiful intentions. And I see that in you. And I like being around people who are bright like you, bright in the mind and then bright in the heart as well. Oh,
thank you so much, Amanda. I have to say I'm tearing up a little at the moment. So,
I'm not trying to butter you up, Kathy. I'm just I'm just telling you that
because I have no power.
I really appreciate people who, and this is anyone, people who build things. Because Lori Vaughn taught me this when I was in peds, that destruction is a lower level skill, right? And so it's really easy to tear things down. It's really easy to criticize. But building and seeing possibility and seeing opportunity and literally creating new worlds, again, the intangible and the tangible, like I respect and I honor people who can take something and make it grand, or take nothing and make something out of it.
Thank you.
And that's what you're doing. And I see that in you.
What you just said is like rolling around and around in my head, that destruction is a lower level skill. And it's the construction that really takes the hard work. And I think that's a really important message for all of us right now, in particular, that people are so critical of so many things, and yet applying that same energy to building new organizations, new structures, new solutions to new problems. All of those things is something that really needs to be happening in the whole world.
I couldn't agree more. I think about that often. My perspective is people are inherently good. That's what I believe. And so when people make decisions maybe I don't agree with, I think, well, where are they operating from cognitively, right? Like how much information do they have? How capable are they? And even if they're making destructive decisions, let's say, I just have to remember, okay, well, that's probably where they're at right now. And they're doing the best they can with what they've got. And so how do we support people?
Not just cognitively, but emotionally as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because you said the word destruction, and I realized that's different from deconstruction.
Ooh.
Right? Deconstruction is careful. Like before tearing down a wall, you want to shut off the electrical power.
Yes, that's a good idea.
You want to do it in layers so that you're not compromising the larger structure. And it makes it easier to clean up. And it also decreases the risk of hurting yourself, right? I currently have a 1960 Electrolux vacuum cleaner completely disassembled on my workbench at home. There were a couple of things I wanted to fix. Some of them were imperative. Some of them were like, oh, well, I've got this apart. I should replace this switch too. And, that kind of thing. But I had to do it really carefully because I wanted to be able to put it back together.
Right.
And I think, maybe that there's a parallel there, that if you want to be able to put things back together, you've got to do your deconstruction strategically.
Yep.
And keep a record of what you've done. So I was taking pictures of taking it apart. I just have to figure out how to run the YouTube video that showed how to take it apart in reverse so I can put it back together.
I am confident you will figure it out.
I just need the time.
When you're doing all of this work, is it enjoyable to you?
I'm hesitating because parts of it are not. There's always a black hole in the middle of the process where you're not sure if you want to keep going forward or go back, and where the solutions are not readily apparent. And frankly, I would feel that same process when I was doing like a wheelchair evaluation, that I'm gathering information, looking at things, trying to understand things. And the solution is not always immediately apparent. And you have to really work on it to come around, try some different things, get some feedback on those things. That's why you do mock-ups.
So, Kathy, we know you're a tinkerer, which I don't think is that weird. So I have to ask you, are you weird?
I would say it depends on who you ask. Some people thought I was pretty weird for unretiring.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then they've seen how happy I've been with most of that. And I think they get it. And the other thing that some people might think is weird is that I spend a lot of time in the basement sometimes.
When you first mentioned the basement, I had images of like a troll hideaway, which I don't think that's what you're working with in the basement. You said do you have a lot of extra materials in the basement?
So let me just give you a little background. The house that we live in, we've been there for almost 31 years. It's an 1895 Queen Anne Victorian, and it's a big house. So when we first moved into the house, as if there weren't already enough rooms, I decided to finish off a room in the basement. And that's the room where I do much of my crafting. And it's big enough that it has a ping pong table in the middle and then workspaces around the edges where I have sewing machines and stained glass and jewelry making. And I was really happy to discover after I met the person I am married to, but before we got married, that he had model trains from his years growing up and his father's and his grandfather's.
Wow.
And then one year he bought me my own Polar Express. So, it's like this wonderful place to play and do all the things you want to do. And then there's also a small wood shop that I set up there, and we both work in that, but I do feel like it's my space to control, how you divide up your house, right?
Yeah. Yep. I'm just curious, are the trains set up?
Not usually.
Oh, okay. Because I was actually getting like Santa's workshop vibes, like with a train around and all these crafty materials.
Some parts of the year they are. So, it's been kind of a fun adult thing, but it's really how little boys used to learn about electric circuits. And, it's all low voltage, but still, that's why more boys became engineers and, those kinds of professions, was because they had those exposures as a kid, at least, in boomer land. I'm a boomer.
On a mini tangent here, did you ever consider being an engineer? Or did that ever cross your mind, thinking about how much you build and problem solve?
I started college as a math major in 1971. And after one semester, I thought, what can I possibly do with math other than be a math teacher? And that's not what I want to do. And the irony of that is that my mother started college in 1941, 30 years before that, as a math major. And we all know what happened in the 40s. War broke out in Europe and the US got involved. And my mother ended up signing up for an engineering training program that was run at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. She finished there and went to work for Curtiss-Wright. So I had that in my family heritage, and nobody said, maybe you should be an engineer. But then I ended up working with engineers, and I thought, I think I like this better because as an OT, I'm addressing the person-centered part of this equation, this team. And I know enough about what the engineers can and can't do that I can make suggestions and say, how would you go about doing this? And they could go off on that and build things.
Bridging the gap, having the skill to engage with the person and the skill to understand the building process. We've had a lot of occupational therapists on the show. And I mean, are we all weird? I just wonder.
I'm sort of baffled by the word
Weird.
And I think, if one were to generalize about occupational therapists, which I always think is a dangerous thing to do, to generalize about anybody. The generalization used to be that OTs wore Birkenstocks and all natural fiber clothing, but we're sort of past that generation. The values that we have been taught, trained to uphold are something that more of the world should aspire to. And maybe part of it is that we feel, especially lately, that people are not celebrating the diversity and individuality of folks and looking at people as whole people.
Yes.
Ever since I took my first airplane flight when I was in about 7th grade, I would look down from the plane as you're taking off or landing and see cars and people and stuff, and just be amazed that every single one of those many, many people that you could see each had lives as individual and as full as my life. And I think about that when I drive around Springfield and I see people who get discounted because they don't own their own home, or they don't even have a home, or they don't look like they speak English, which we don't know. They might not. Or, that they're clearly facing a different set of challenges than I face in my life. And that every one of those people is their own person with their own priorities and their own meaning and their own purpose. And they are no more or no less than any other person in the world. And I think as OTs, we're trained to recognize that. Or maybe we attract people who recognize that.
Yes, celebrating the individuality and what makes people unique. And as OTs, we're actually really trying to celebrate it and to get them to lean into more of who they are.
Yeah. So thank you for encouraging me to recognize my own weirdness.
The weirdness in me honors the weirdness in you.
That's so Marlo Thomas.
So that's a wrap on this episode of But Are You Weird? Thank you so much to Kathy Post for letting us get to know you and showing us your weird and wonderful self. And thank you for tuning in and getting weird with us. As always, I am so glad that you're here. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, leave a comment, or share it with your favorite curious mind. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and definitely stay weird.